Hello and welcome to my channel. It's nice of you to be there. I hope you're doing very well. My name is Juan and today I am here to talk to you about books to read in autumn. So yes, we are in September. That means that autumn or fall, if you prefer, is upon us. At least for those of us who live in the northern part of the world. This means that days are getting shorter, there is a chill in the air and even rain. Even here on the island. Now, for many people, autumn also means Halloween, so I'm going to include some spooky books in my list of recommendations for autumn. But for me, I must say that September has always meant new beginnings, and this probably goes back to my days as a student. But still now, I think it feels like the new year begins in September rather than in January to me. So I'm going to start with a novel that has a school setting in part, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by the great Scottish writer Muriel Sparks. This is in fact her best known novel. The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie is such a wonderful novel. All the characters are so flawed, just so imperfect. I just love that in a novel. Now, this book came out in 1961, but it is set during the 1930s. Jean Brodie is a single middle-aged woman who works as a teacher in an all-girls school in Edinburgh, in Scotland. She has very strong and, let's say, unorthodox ideas about education. For example, she believes that she's in her prime, hence the title of the novel, and she also believes that God is always on her side, which in my experience is something that only very dangerous people tend to believe. Now, Jean Brodie's beliefs, I don't think would be much of a problem if it weren't for the fact that she taught a group of impressionable 10-year-old girls. Jean Brodie's girls are Sandy, Rose, Mary, Jenny, Monica, and Eunice. Now, these 6 girls form the so-called Brodie set at school. And what does Jean Brodie teach these girls? Well, she doesn't follow their curriculum and instead teaches them Latin, art history, and, fascism. Yeah, Jean Brodie is a fascist, in the true sense of the word. She admires Benito Mussolini, and later she will go on to support the nationalists in the Spanish Civil War. And she wants to make sure that her girls, the Brodie set, are on that side of history. Now, remember that the book is set at the heyday of fascism in Europe, but it was written decades later. And I think it is important to bear that in mind as you read the novel. And I think that's also one of the reasons it hasn't aged. Now, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie follows that Brodie set of girls into adolescence and young adulthood. Of course, I'm not going to reveal the plot here, so don't worry, but I think you'll have a lot of fun just seeing how being taught irrelevant things and dangerous ideas will influence some of these girls, particularly one of them, Sandy. Now, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie is a deliciously short novel. I also love it for that. It's perfect for reading in 1 or 2 sittings, rather. But its length is just perfect, okay? You don't need any more to get to know these fascinating but ultimate tragic figure that is Jean Brodie. Now, reading this novel always makes me laugh, but it is also deeply sad. It is easy to see how Jean Brodie seduces a group of girls because I think she also manages to seduce readers, even though I hope we soon see through her. So, if you want to be la crème de la crème, as Jean Brodie would put it when talking about her girls, you just need to read this novel. Okay, now on to one of my all-time favorite novels, which I think is just perfect for this time of year. And of course, I'm talking about Jane Eyre. If you follow my videos, you probably know by now that I love Jane Eyre. That's one of the bookish facts about me. I've already reviewed the novel here. Of course, I'm going to link to that if you want to get a full review with all the background information and so on. But I want to recommend this novel as a book for autumn because it has the perfect mix of romance, eroticism, and gothic. It is hard for me to say why I love Jane Eyre so much and why I always recommend it. I guess I just love the main character, Jane. And something that I think really works in this novel is that Jane is the one who tells her own story. So an immediate connection is established between her and the reader. At least that's what happened to me, right from the first sentence to the famous last one in the novel. Now, I find Jane's voice rather, so compelling that despite its status as a classic, I find Jane Eyre a real page-turner. And I've read this novel many times at this point. I just can't get sick of it. It always has the same effect on me. I think that Jane Eyre comes close to being my comfort read. I just love it, what can I say? But don't make the mistake of thinking that it's cozy. The world of Jane Eyre is dark, so if you're into Gothic novels with their haunted mansions and their dark, stormy nights, etc., I think you just cannot afford to miss out on Jane Eyre, honestly. Jane Eyre is thrilling and mesmerizing, perhaps a bit less to us than it was to Victorian readers, if I'm honest. You know, I don't want to give you the false impression that this is the perfect novel or that everything in it works. Jane Eyre was first published in 1847 and Victorians simply lapped it up. But we are not Victorians anymore, luckily. So some of the thrills that people in the 19th century would have experienced reading this novel might not translate to us so well now. There are some passages in the novel that come off simply as silly. For example, when Mr. Rochester dresses up as a fortune teller. What's that about? I hate that part. But in terms of plot, there is a forward progression in Jane Eyre that, coupled with the character's voice telling the reader her own story, her autobiography, makes this novel irresistible. But I know that many people prefer Wuthering Heights by Charlotte's sister Emily Bronte. Jane Eyre is of course special to me, but I'm happy to also very passionately recommend Wuthering Heights. Both novels use Gothic elements, but I think the similarities between them stop there. Wuthering Heights is a fragmentary narrative with a complex structure. I think, if I'm being fair, that Jane Eyre is a lot more straightforward. So I feel like readers would prefer one over the other. Have never met anyone who liked both novels equally. I am Team Jane Eyre, but I appreciate Wuthering Heights, which I also think is a great novel. I would say that Jane Eyre is more restrained, while Wuthering Heights is wilder. A tale of obsession that I find bewildering, but a lot of people find compelling and romantic. And if I think about it, yeah, Wuthering Heights is a romantic novel. It's romantic, but romantic with a capital R. Now, the novel has at its core, of course, the relationship between Heathcliff and Catherine, two really famous characters whose differences are irreconcilable, most notably their social class difference, and that's what keeps them apart. But in many ways, both those characters are extremely close. I think they are almost two sides of the same coin, as it were. Now, Catherine and Heathcliff grew up together in rural Yorkshire, which is in the north of England, and the landscape, that particularly ragged and weather-beaten landscape, is one of the main ingredients of this novel. Now, if you have never read Wuthering Heights before, I think this might be the perfect time of the year to read it. But if you are in the mood for something perhaps less gothic and more recent, then To Kill a Mockingbird is always a winning choice, I think. I just love this novel. To Kill a Mockingbird is an American novel by Harper Lee. It's the only novel that was published while the author was still alive, and I think it's just a little masterpiece. It is a novel for almost all ages, I would say. Probably the only one suitable for younger readers in my list in this video. Now, like all novels about racism, To Kill a Mockingbird is timeless, unfortunately. This novel is also a bestseller to this day, so I'm risking here that most of you might have already read it, in which case I'm sorry. Or if you haven't read it, you might think that the novel is for children. And I would understand that, because that's what I used to think, and that was the main reason I put off reading this novel for years. But I'm here to tell you that I was 40 when I read it and I had a great time. So while it is suitable for younger readers, it is not only for them. And I must say that although I am generally not a fan of novels narrated by children, in this case, it works. So the novel is narrated by a girl named Jean Louise Finch, known as Scout, whose father, Atticus, is a lawyer in a poor town in the American South. She spends her summers playing with her brother Jem and their friend Dill. So in the first part of the novel, we follow the three children and their adventures in the course of 2 summers. And they encounter a mysterious local man who is a recluse, whom the children refer to as Boo Radley. That's the first part. Now, later, Atticus is appointed to defend a black man accused of raping a white girl. And at that point, the novel turns into a very compelling courtroom drama. Now, To Kill a Mockingbird is, among other things, a novel about how we lose our innocence when we're confronted with the horrors of life. You know, there's a moment when we just lose our innocence. So it's a great coming-of-age story, and if Atticus is Scout and Jem's father, Victor Frankenstein is the father of one of the most fascinating creatures in literature. Now, how's that for a segue? Now, if you have never read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, just don't think about it twice and read it. You know, Frankenstein's monster, I think, transcends literature because we have seen it in so many movies and TV shows over the years, over the decades. But, you know, put aside everything you think you know about the monster and its creator, and instead immerse yourself in this great, great novel. Now, one of the best things about Frankenstein is that it is Mary Shelley's first novel. And she also wrote it when she was only 19. So, you know, Sally Rooney, put that in your pipe and smoke it. Now, Frankenstein is genuinely terrifying. Again, a good suggestion for Halloween, perhaps. And it also puts forward such complex ethical questions that I think remain so relevant to this day. It is telling that Mary Shelley wrote this novel soon after losing a baby she was expecting, whose father would have been her boyfriend, the romantic poet Percy Shelley, whom she later married. Now, Mary, Percy, and their friend, the also poet Lord Byron, were staying at the latter's village in Geneva in what was one of the coldest and wettest summers in recorded history. Famously, you probably know this, but famously Byron challenged the group to write a ghost story each, and that is how Frankenstein was born. Although, you know, Mary Shelley didn't really write about ghosts or supernatural phenomena as such in Frankenstein. What she wrote about is a young and overambitious Swiss scientist who manages to create human life. Of course, he immediately regrets that and is haunted by what he's done for the rest of his life. Victor Frankenstein is a modern-day Prometheus, but instead of being punished by gods, like the ancient Prometheus in the myth, it is his conscience and the actions of his creation that punish him. Look, this novel, Frankenstein, is far from perfect. When I was a student, in fact, I used to say that it was the most badly written, great novel that I had ever read. I now think I was too harsh on it. I indeed think that Frankenstein could be better written. I still think that, whatever that means, and that's debatable. But its influence in literature and popular culture is so great that you simply have to read it. There's just no escaping it. Now, one of the most surprising things about Frankenstein is that, unlike what people who haven't read it, I think, might think, the creature is extremely articulate and intelligent. I did not expect that. And that makes its story, or his story, if you like, so poignant. It is hard for me not to empathize with the creature. But I also think that as readers, we also understand Victor's motivation to some extent in creating it or him. And it is funny because I don't think of myself as a fan of horror, and yet Frankenstein, which again, I strongly recommend all the books in this video, is considered a horror masterpiece. But again, I'm also not a fan of science fiction or a science fiction reader, but I would also recommend Fahrenheit 451 by the American author Ray Bradbury. Fahrenheit 451 is a dystopian novel that depicts a world that I think would be most readers' nightmare. A world where all books are banned. Can you imagine that? Now, like most dystopian novels, Fahrenheit 451 has a futuristic urban setting somewhere in America. In that society, firemen are tasked with burning all the books they can find. Now, the country is at the brink of war when the novel begins, and the novel's protagonist, Guy Montag, is a fireman who becomes intrigued by books and begins to question why the government wants to burn them. Now, as a fireman, he has access to books, right? And so he manages to salvage some of those books, and he keeps them hidden away in his house. Now, one day he decides to begin reading them, and his life will never be the same again. But let's come back to reality now. So for many people, students, teachers, parents, September means going back to school, right? So I want to talk about The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger because, this is a novel that also takes place during the school year. Now, some people find this novel infuriating and others adore it. I have read it a few times and I consider it a masterpiece, and I'm not alone. It is one of the first few books I think that made a lasting impression on me when I read it as a young man, which I think is a great time to read it for the first time. But perhaps I like this novel so much because of the unique voice of its protagonist, Holden Caulfield. Now, like Jane Eyre, here the main character tells you his own story in a unique voice. Although, unlike Jane Eyre, here the action only covers a few days, okay? Now, Holden Caulfield is perhaps the first rebellious teenager in literature. Unlike all his predecessors, he's not like any of them. He's no Huckleberry Finn, he's no David Copperfield, and he makes sure to make this clear in his narration. Now, the story happens around Christmas, but that doesn't make it a Christmas story. I don't think there's anything Christmassy about The Catcher in the Rye, although, there is some snow, I think. Anyway, that's why I decided to include it as a suggestion for autumn instead. So, Holden Caulfield is 16, and getting into the head of a 16-year-old boy can be unsettling if you are much older or not a man, I assume. This is why I am in awe of J.D. Salinger, who was around 40, I think, when he wrote the novel. Okay. Now, The Catcher in the Rye is a very funny novel, okay? Particularly if you read it way past your teenage years. So I find it funnier and funnier the more I read it. Holden Caulfield takes everything way too seriously, and I think that's funny. And also, he thinks that he knows everything. He's also an individualist, although I don't really think that the novel comments on that. I think that's just part of being an American. Okay. What about something truly creepy now? I have The Turn of the Screw, which is a famous novella by Henry James. And, it is only, I think it's the only ghost story that I'm going to recommend to you today. You might be familiar with one of the many movies or TV adaptations of it, but I don't think nothing quite matches the book. This novella has all the right ingredients to be spooky. It has a big house in the English countryside, it has posh people, it has young children, it has a governess, and yes, I am terrified of all those things. Now, The Turn of the Screw is a novella, so it is obviously very short, and it has a simple yet terrifying plot. Just perfect, I think, for a rainy afternoon. Now, the next book I'm going to recommend is more complex and a lot longer. The Picture of Dorian Gray has some elements of the Gothic mixed with homoeroticism, while also managing to deal with complex moral issues. So, you could say that it is quite a cocktail. This novel, written by Oscar Wilde, which was his only novel, by the way, deals with morality and corruption. Its prose can be a bit too ornate, but it is also a hugely entertaining novel. I've had so much fun with it. I own this uncensored copy that only came out a few years ago for the first time, but you can read the version that was published as a book when Oscar Wilde was still alive, which is the one that most people have read and the one that I studied at university. Now, Dorian Gray is an incredibly beautiful young man whose corruption begins at the very moment when he realizes that he's beautiful. So as soon as he becomes aware of it, okay? Dorian's portrait is painted by Basil Hallward. Basil is at first reluctant to introduce Dorian to his friend Lord Henry Wotton. And he's right, because everything goes downhill for poor Dorian from the very moment Wotton sets his eyes on him and makes the young man see for himself how beautiful he truly is. So Wotton corrupts Dorian in a morally profound manner. Dorian will go on to become a hedonist, but not only that, he will go on to do terrible things. Dorian is driven to drugs, sexual debauchery, and even murder. However, despite all of that, he stays young and beautiful, unscathed from all the damage that he's inflicting on both his body and his soul. Meanwhile, the picture that his friend painted in the portrait becomes uglier and older. Now, the picture of Dorian Gray is, I think, one of the best portrayals of decadence I have ever read. And since autumn is also when the beginning of decay that precedes winter happens, I think this is the perfect time of the year to read it as well. But now, let me talk about a book I read this summer, but even as I read it, I thought it might be better suited for colder weather, and that was The Name of the Rose, which is this massive novel. It's also a page-turner and a medieval murder mystery, of course written by the Italian writer Umberto Eco. Now, The Name of the Rose was turned into a blockbuster movie starring Sean Connery, the Scottish actor, in the 1980s. I never saw the movie, I haven't seen it to this day, and now that I have read the novel, I think I might watch it if I come across it, although I think I would much rather just read the novel again, if I'm honest. The Name of the Rose, the novel, is both a page-turner, as I said, but also a slow burner. There is plenty of action, but there is also a lot of reflection and plenty of dialogue. Now, my knowledge of medieval Europe and medieval history was incredibly limited when I read The Name of the Rose. It still is, but I feel like I learned so much about it from reading this novel. It's obvious that Umberto Eco, who was also a university professor, was a great intellectual and erudite, so it is no wonder that his first novel, The Name of the Rose, manages to be simultaneously a mystery novel, a historical novel, and a book about religion, literature, and history, and probably a lot more, you know. And that means that you can approach it in very different ways. For example, you can just read it as a straight historical mystery novel, if that's something you're into, and have a great time. But you can also do a deeper reading of it. So I think The Name of the Rose would work for both readers of mystery fiction, of which I am not one, people that perhaps read those novels for plot, but it also would work for people who are into literary fiction, looking for something deeper and more complex. And I think that's what makes The Name of the Rose so amazing. I mean, how many books like that, how many books that manage that have you read? I think The Name of the Rose was incredibly popular in the 1980s and even maybe the 90s. But I would love for people to read it now, or at least revisit if they have already read it, because I think it's timeless and also so much fun to read. So anyway, these are my September or autumn book recommendations. If you have any book recommendations for this season, please feel free to write a comment in this video. I always love to hear from you guys. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again very soon in my next video. Take care.